afternoon. Welcome to our press conference following the EU-CELAC summit, and a special welcome to our guests, the President of Argentina and the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'll first give the floor to the President of the European Council, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. We feel we have really achieved our duty today, that we are seeing a new optimistic, positive chapter open in relations between EU and CELAC. We have just agreed on a declaration on both sides, an ambitious declaration that covers a vast scope of areas for future development. This was supported by all countries with the exception of one that couldn't agree to one single paragraph. So that was the success of this event. We have worked seriously and intensely on all of the different points on our agenda, which include all of the different issues relating to climate change, biodiversity, the different challenges relating to the green transition, the digital transition, also working on areas of economic and trade cooperation, the subject of investments as well, and acting together to defend the values and principles that are close to our hearts, the values of multilateralism. We want to have a multipolar world based on the principles of the United Nations Charter, the principles of sovereignty, and all of these points were the subject of in-depth exchanges and discussions. And then at the end of this meeting, we adopted our declaration, which is very important for our future. As you know, for 8 years, we've not managed to meet around the same table, but we are firmly convinced, and this is a message that was generally supported, that we certainly do not want to wait another 8 years to meet again. On the contrary, we've said we want to really breathe new life into our relationship, and that's why we've decided we should have a permanent coordination mechanism, and we've decided that every 2 years we will be holding a summit at the highest level. Let me share with you a few additional elements which I think it's worth highlighting. This summit was an opportunity to have an increasing number of bilateral meetings because aside from the deliverables of this summit, we've got a commitment on the part of the member states of the EU and the member states of CELAC to mobilise different partnerships, concrete proposals to foster investments, and in particular we discussed the supply chains, natural resources. This is a subject which is very important, not just for the EU, and we see that there really is a huge capacity to develop operational partnerships, respecting those principles that are important for the EU, quality investments, the need to have fair, just partnerships with this capacity to develop in a positive way on both sides. And I think this was one of the important points that was put across by the CELAC side. We've clearly understood that message, and we are very committed to it. I don't want to speak at great length. You will have the opportunity to read this declaration, but let me just close by warmly thanking our colleagues, in particular R.Gonsalves, who is the ex-tempore president of CELAC, but also Alberto A.Fernández, his predecessor. Thank you very much for the close cooperation, the friendship, the way we've worked together, which has enabled us to make headway and validate this common programme for the future. And of course, I can't stand here before you today without expressing my immense satisfaction. We've had intense discussions at European level, but I'd like to announce that in Coreper we've managed to have an agreement on principle on the post-Cotonou agreement. This is a very important step. We want the legal finalisation of this to happen by the end of this week. It's a success for the rotating Spanish presidency, for Prime Minister Sanchez. It's a very tangible operational result, and I'm sure there will be many other such examples. And it's also a signal to our friends in Latin America and the Caribbean. We raised this point a lot yesterday and today, and I just want to share that excellent news with you now, and I'm sure everybody will welcome this. And let me close on a more personal note. It's rather unusual for me to do this, and I hope that my colleagues won't hold this against me, but it's the last press conference for my spokesperson, who I've been working with for over 8 years, and I really just wanted to say thank you very much.
Thank you, President of the European Council. May I now give the floor to the Prime Minister of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Thank you very much. Good evening, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen of the media. I first of all want to thank the European Union, the European Commission, Charles, and all the heads of government of the European Union and of CELAC for being involved in what will, I think, turn out to be a historic gathering. The relationship between CELAC and the European Union is stronger today than it was yesterday or the day before yesterday as a consequence of this agreement. It's a wide-ranging agreement of 41 paragraphs touching and concerning all the major contemporary issues which concern us, both regions. CELAC and, well, Europe really remade the Caribbean and Latin America and remade itself. And each region, each of their respective civilizations has to come to terms with the process of this remaking and the consequences of this remaking. And what we have to seek to build is not only a relationship between states, but a relationship between civilizations, Latin American, Caribbean, and European civilizations. We touched on the wide range of practical issues which Charles raised, and not everybody got the language which they wanted. You would expect that there would be disagreements, and it was hard going to get the declaration, but we have arrived at this particular point. Issues touching and concerning climate change, the financing of climate change, the reform of the international financial architecture, inclusive, sustainable development, some matters which have arisen out of history for which there are contemporary manifestations of historical legacies, like, for instance, slavery and the slave trade. Issues on Ukraine, on other conflicts, on the terrible embargo against Cuba, the question of involvement of the private sector in the development of Latin America, the Caribbean, and Europe. The issues of international human rights and good governance and multilateralism and the defense of international law, defense and promotion of international law, fundamental precepts of the Charter of the United Nations made flesh. We have been not together for 8 years in a summit, and in a sense we can borrow from a poem, I'm sure you know it, by Octavio Paz, Nobel laureate for literature from Mexico, in the poem Release, where he addresses the question that we grew, we withered, and then we sprouted again. CELAC EU, we grew, we withered, and we have now sprouted again. And what we have to do, we have to go to our body's edges amidst the unbounded elements of the real world of life, living and production. Thank you very much, Charles. On the basis of this declaration, we have some actions to do. We have a lot of follow-up. This is really just part of the process of the renewal and the reaffirmation of the friendship and the relationship between Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean. We have spoken a lot over the last few days, and you'll have a lot of questions, I have no doubt, to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Madam President, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alberto. Thank you very much, Ralph. Thank you very much, Charles. Indeed, it was an excellent summit, and it really felt like a new beginning for old friends. We need each other. These are times of great geopolitical change, and like-minded friends like us need to stand together. We had good deliveries, and I want to focus on the part of deliveries for our people and for our businesses. On the first day, we launched the Global Gateway Investment Agenda for Latin America and the Caribbean. We will bring over 45 billion euro of high-quality European investment to Latin America and the Caribbean. More than 135 projects are already in the pipeline, so it's a very good start. Now, of course, together we have to shape the investment agenda, and we have to decide which sectors, which value chains to prioritize, and then we have to implement and deliver. The range of projects is very wide. It goes from clean hydrogen to critical raw materials, from data cable networks to mRNA vaccines. Important is that, and we discussed that a lot, Global Gateway is not just about how much we are investing, but also about how we are investing. We want that our investment comes with the highest environmental and social standards, with transparency about what is happening. We want to share technology and knowledge, and the training of local workforce for the jobs of the future is one of the core elements. For us, it's important in this investment, and that makes it different, that the local communities benefit from the value chain, the added value produced there. This is also in our interest because we want reliable and trustworthy suppliers. This is also the spirit of the bilateral agreements that we concluded at this summit. First, we signed a critical raw materials agreement with Chile, and we also signed 2 MOUs on energy with Argentina and one with Uruguay. They are both on green energy, and particular on green hydrogen. So truly a win-win situation for both regions and both continents. My second point is on the trade agreements. I am very confident, especially after these 2 days, that in the coming months we will be able to wrap up the negotiations with Mercosur. Our ambition is to settle any remaining differences as soon as possible and to conclude by the latest by the end of this year. And I am also confident that we will conclude the negotiations on the modernized EU-Mexico agreement in the following month. I also welcome strongly the good news on the post-Cotonou agreement. We finally made it. It was a lot of negotiations, but now we found an agreement among the member states, and we will manage to sign it soon. My final point is on the global impact of Russia's war against Ukraine. I am deeply concerned about Russia's move to terminate the Black Sea Grain Initiative, despite the efforts of the United Nations and Turkey. The risk is that it brings food insecurity to so many vulnerable countries across the globe. The European Union will, with all means, continue to work to ensure that food security for vulnerable people is given. As you know, we have complementary the solidarity lanes. More than 45 million tons of grain, oilseed and other products have been exported via the solidarity lanes. The Black Sea Grain Initiative added another 35 million tons. So we will for sure continue bringing agri-food products out of Ukraine to the global markets via the solidarity lane, but it is important that the blocking of the Black Sea is stopped and that the export via the Black Sea can keep on going. We discussed a lot, of course, the fact that everybody wants this war to end. And peace needs to be just and enduring, and it needs to be centered. And the core has to be the UN Charter. We discussed the importance of the UN Charter explicitly. It is the common ground for us. It is there for every single country with the international law, and it is in all our interest to be very strong on protecting the international law and protecting the UN Charter. In this spirit, we have discussed, and it was, as I said, an excellent beginning for new friends to have a new tradition every 2 years to meet with CELAC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President. Al Presidente de Argentina, usted tiene la palabra.
President of Argentina, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My first words are words of gratitude. Thank you, Ursula. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Ralph. And thank you also to my dear friend Pedro Sanchez, the pro tempore President of the European Union. You've done a fantastic job. It seemed it was going to be difficult to bring together so many countries and get agreement in just 2 days of work on so many different issues. Given the current situation, the issues that are affecting Latin America and the Caribbean, and the issues that are affecting Europe as well. This was a very important moment, an ambitious meeting, and it really met the expectations with which many of us came here. It had been some time since Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean last met, and we managed to meet again after 8 years as CELAC and the EU. I remember back in 2006, Latin America, the EU, the Caribbean. I participated in a meeting. Many years have gone by since then, and I don't think we've ever had so much agreement on so many points as we have today. So that's why I'm so happy and so satisfied with the outcome of this meeting. I think it's important for our region, Latin America and the Caribbean. On the different points that Ralph was mentioning there, you will see a lot of expressions from Europe there, acknowledging, recognising problems, points of view from Latin America and the Caribbean in which we need to confront today. As Ursula said, we are all concerned about the situation of war in Ukraine. Quite clearly, we are concerned. And the countries of Latin America have always expressed their desire to work to recover peace quickly, and that should be enduring peace. And we still say today that war is not the way within this multilateral world that has its own bodies which exist, and so we should not repeat that situation. I'm very happy that we've got the agreement on energy with Ursula, which we signed yesterday. That's very important for Argentina. There's a lot of legal uncertainty in terms of investments from Europe, and that's certainly of interest when it comes to energy. And I'm also happy because this was the first time that we had the opportunity to discuss in such clear terms a mechanism that would take us away from extractivism in Latin America. This whole idea that Latin America is just a producer of raw materials. And that has always prevented us from industrialising that primary production. And this was the first time that we really crossed the T's and dotted the I's and talked about extractivism. And I think it took 5 centuries, but we managed it. I'm saying that half in jest, but we have at last succeeded. We now can look at the products of our land, look at the value of it, count on investments from Europe, and that's very important for us, very encouraging. And it's also very encouraging that we had a very frank discussion. And at every turn, we managed to find overlap with Europe on democracy, on the rule of law, and on the full respect for human rights. And these are very solid, this is a very solid basis for the work of our countries, and it's on that basis that we achieved our agreement. So I want to thank all of you for the efforts made. My dear friend Pedro Sánchez, who's campaigning now, and that's why he's not up here with us, but who did such an important job in inviting us here. He knows how important the issues are for Latin America. He knows how much respect and admiration we have for him in Latin America and the Caribbean as well. And we, of course, understand why he wasn't able to attend. So thank you very much to all of you. Very happy with the agreement. Thank you for your hospitality, for all of the efforts and the hospitality here in Brussels.
Gracias, señor presidente. We're going to take a few questions now. Marta from TUB. Yes, please.
¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. I'll speak Spanish as it is the CELAC summit. The first question is for the President of the Council and either of the two representatives from CELAC. Ukraine has become a problem in the negotiations here between all of the countries. We've got one paragraph in the Council conclusions where there wasn't agreement. Do you think this has brought into question this summit? I mean, you've got all the other paragraphs. Is this undermining the whole of the rest of the agreement? And then my second question on Pedro Sánchez. He's not here today at such an important summit because of the electoral campaign.
Deux points. Le premier...
2 points. The first point is on the position of the EU on the war against Ukraine. We have reiterated this at each and every summit. We have reiterated our determination to defend protection of the interests of Ukraine against this aggression by Russia. And if you look at this declaration, it's now been validated by both sides. You'll read in that declaration that there are a number of points that have been expressed that refer to that situation, which is having an impact on the entire world. And you will also see that there is strong determination to defend the principles of multilateralism and world order that is a rules-based world order. That is absolutely essential. And as I indicated at the start of the meeting, we are absolutely delighted that we were able to agree on a strong position. 60 countries around the table on both sides, EU and CELAC, and together with my colleague who co-chaired this, R.Gonsalves, I said there was just one country that couldn't agree to just one paragraph in that. When you weigh up all of the different negotiating efforts and compromises that were required in order to achieve agreement on an international agenda that is as rich as this that we had on the table for this summit is clearly a huge success, and that was thanks to our diplomatic efforts, but also the mutual trust between ourselves and the ability that we had, not just today and yesterday, but for quite some time now, to really understand the convictions, feelings on both sides, and we were able to develop that position together. Then on the Spanish Prime Minister, I have said since the very outset that Spain is very committed. It's a diplomatic effort to prepare this summit that takes a long time between all of the EU member states and the CELAC countries, and we've seen just a few minutes ago, not only did we get agreement on this declaration, but I was also pleased to announce this agreement on the post-Cotonou situation. As you know, for months we had difficulties in the EU on this subject. For months we were trying to get consensus amongst ourselves. So I'm delighted, as I say, that thanks to our tenacity, thanks to the tenacity of the Spanish team under the lead of Pedro Sanchez, they've been able to reach this agreement, which should be legally implemented by the end of this week.
Paula, yes, from TV Globo in Brazil. Paula.
Hi, good evening. It's O Globo newspaper in Brazil.
Oh, yes.
Just correcting, sorry. Good evening. So thank you for doing this. I would like to ask, during his speech here, President Lula said that the negotiation of the agreement between the Mercosur and the European Union should be based on trust and not on threats. He also said that the defense of the environment should not be an excuse for protectionism. I would like to ask the Europeans on stage mainly, of course, others could also comment, are you threatening the Mercosur countries? And are you using the environment as an excuse to protect your economies? Thank you.
Yo puedo contestar, pero for you the question.
No, I'm ready to say a few words, and this is absolutely clear, and that's also the spirit during this summit that threatening is not the way we are working on the EU side. We do not have any hidden agenda. We are extremely transparent, and we would like to strengthen the economic and the trade ties with Latin America and the Caribbean. And the President of the Commission has very well explained where we stand and what are our common goals. And I'm absolutely convinced that this high-level meeting today and yesterday was a great occasion, a great opportunity to listen to each other, to better understand what are the concerns on both sides, because there are concerns on both sides for this agreement. And I'm absolutely convinced that we share the same priorities, especially concerning the defense of the biodiversity, the importance to address seriously climate change. And one important topic we discussed today and yesterday is related to the financing, because we understand very well that the current financing system is not fair, and that's why we are absolutely determined to work together. Also, because there will be important political moments in the months to come, especially at the level of the United Nations, in order to try to make sure that all the countries across the world are assuming their responsibilities, what we are doing on the EU side, because it is absolutely true that for many years on the EU side we think that we need collectively to be serious in addressing climate change and the consequences. And many colleagues in Latin America and the Caribbean, they share and they are absolutely committed, and they can see every day the consequences of this climate change topic and this climate change issue.
¿Puedo agregar algo? Permiso.
Yes, yes.
¿Puedo?
Go ahead first and then.
Gracias.
Yeah.
Thank you. If I may just add something. I would like to shed some light on two things. The first is that Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez did a tremendous amount for this meeting, and he was with us until just a moment ago. And then, of course, he had to go back to Spain to campaign to uphold the best democratic values in Spain. So we're very happy that he's doing that. It's certainly not a nuisance for us. And then on that question, I'd like to clear up a couple of points. Lula is a friend of mine. We work closely together on this point, also together with the European Union. And the truth of the matter is that once Lula became president of Brazil, from that moment on, we were able to pick up once again reasonable dialogue with the European Union. There was a time during which there was no respect for the Amazon in Brazil, and that was clear to the European Union and countries such as Argentina. That was not just the point of view of the European Union, it was also the perspective of Argentina. And we see in the agreement with Lula that there are, of course, matters that we need to attend to. We had an agreement in July 2017. Then in December we had the announcement of the Green Deal, which will have an impact on that initial agreement. And so, of course, we have to come back to certain points and discuss them with the European Union. Ursula visited me in Buenos Aires. She also went to several other countries. And so we've expressed those points of concern and we're continuing to work on them. And so I think we are on the right track. It's a very positive track towards an agreement. But as I said in my own speech, an agreement has to be a win-win. If you have one winner and one loser, it's not a good agreement. And so what we want to do is uphold an agreement in which everyone is happy. Thank you.
Good agreement that we are negotiating and that both sides are deeply convinced of the high value of this agreement. And indeed, my travel to Brazil and Argentina helped a lot to listen and to understand what the ideas on Mercosur's side are, and to mirror that with our ideas. And there's a strong consensus. We share the same goals. We want the protection of climate and biodiversity. And President Lula, since in office, has made huge progress, for example, in stopping deforestation. And all this will be reflected in a chapeau document that we are just finalizing now. So important was to travel, to be there, to speak to each other eye to eye, to listen to each other and to understand each other's standpoint. And since then, for me, there's even more clarity that we will be successful with this agreement and that we will finalize it.
Thank you, Madam President. Yes, Luisa from El Diario Nación de Argentina. Luisa.
Merci. Ceci est une question pour...
Thank you. I have a question for Charles Michel. My question is with regard to the format of the conference. You've all talked about bilateral agreements and the success of those agreements, whereas for a couple of days we've seen blocks on the declaration on the conference. So for future meetings, are you going to keep the same format? Would it maybe not be wiser to organise other formats, such as mini-regional summits? I don't know whether that's an interesting idea or not. Please tell me whether you think so. Well, we always look forward to interesting ideas. This format is the 27 member states of the EU and the 33 members of CELAC. And we are there to reach agreement on very complex, essential issues. We bring together 60 governments representing all their different peoples and interests. And it's not easy. Of course, it's not easy. It's required a lot of commitment. But it's because there is a clear conviction around the table that we are united by many things. We have a strong link. We are united, more united than divided. So after 8 years, we felt it was important to have this meeting, this joint declaration, and this is the starting point for this new chapter. And I believe there will be much closer, more regular contact, constant contact in the future, and it will enable us maybe to have closer understanding. We can meet again in 2 years to strengthen the ties between the EU and the CELAC region.
Saying in relation to what has been asked by our dear sister, that there have been regional meetings of one kind or another involving the European Union, the Caribbean, Central America, South American countries on different subjects. But clearly, it is vital that the political leaderships in Latin America and the Caribbean and the European Union to give life and direction and meaning to this relationship at the highest level. You have to meet from time to time. It's a terrible thing that we hadn't met for 8 years. Now we're going to meet the next time. We're going to meet in Colombia. The agreement, the declaration has said that in 2025. And CELAC itself has put itself in a position where it can look forward to these kinds of meetings in a more structured way. For instance, there's already an agreement in CELAC that Honduras will succeed St. Vincent and the Grenadines next year as the PTP of CELAC. In 2025, Colombia will succeed. Here, we had a meeting with the Troika, the immediate past PTP of CELAC, then myself, Honduras, plus one, the chair of CARICOM, of the Caribbean Community. But what this meeting has been about is to provide leadership. If I may just say something which connected with one of the questions which was asked earlier in relation to climate change. Paragraph 23 of this declaration says this: we stress the importance to fulfill the commitment by developed countries jointly to mobilize US $100 billion per year for climate finance to support developing countries and to double adaptation finance by 2025. Well, there was this promise made in Stockholm in 2009 and that we should start something by 2020. Nothing has happened. Now we are having the 27 countries of the European Union saying, hey, we're going to push and do something about this. Now, this is an important declaration. Now, we have to work through details on these matters. And there's several other such paragraphs. I know that from time to time it is in the nature of human beings, particularly, and it's good for journalists to be cynical because it is stock in trade. But there's great promise here, and I think we should not suspend our judgment as to what is here, but to hold us, and particularly the Europeans in this case, because they have more resources, to hold their feet to the fire. So that, I mean, it would be an awful thing if you write this in paragraph 23, and then in 2025, we see no money. That would be a hell of a thing. Then your cynicism would be justified.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Yes, Ian, from the FT, another question.
Thank you very much. Ian Johnston, Financial Times. Just to come back to the paragraphs on Ukraine, does the last 48 hours show that despite 18 months of war, documented war crimes by Russia, Europe can still not convince some countries in the global south to unite behind a condemnation of Russia's invasion? And to Prime Minister Gonsalves and President Fernández, has there been too much of a focus on Ukraine at this summit? Has that used up energy that could have been dedicated to other issues such as climate change, trade relations?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I can tell you straight from the very beginning. I said to Charles, we cannot make this summit between the European Union and CELAC be a summit on Ukraine. But clearly, Ukraine is a matter of great importance to Europe and the world. Other conflicts too in the world. And if you read the paragraph on Ukraine, you would see what is said here. Paragraph 15, we express deep concern on the ongoing war against Ukraine. And then they detail that great concern. Then that section of the paragraph says, we support all diplomatic efforts aimed at a just and sustainable peace in line with the UN Charter. Then it goes on to recognize the national positions of the various governments as adumbrated in the UN General Assembly resolutions. And it ends, it is essential to uphold international law and the multilateral system that safeguards peace and stability. So there's a reaffirmation of positions and a ticking of the box. It doesn't mean that you have to go and do the lambada in the nude anytime a subject is raised. It's not a, the language is there. I mean, I don't know what we need to do more than this to get the attraction of persons. Clearly, we have concerns. Europe has concerns about Ukraine. The concerns for us with Ukraine, among other things, would be the terrible suffering that is taking place among peoples who who are directly involved in the conflict, but also because of increasing prices, shortages of commodities, increasing immiseration of people as a consequence not only of the war, but of the sanctions consequent upon the war, and all of these things. And we need to make the world a better place. I mean, but you're responsible people. We put things down in words. I know in these, that you don't have to go and dramatize anything. Just you put it in clear and precise language and mean what you say. Simple as that.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Tommaso, yes, from ADN Kronos.
Yes, good afternoon, Tommaso Gallovati in Kronos, Italy. It's just a question. I apologize to go back to the war in Ukraine, but given that Cardinal Matteo Zuppi is being received to the White House, if I'm not mistaken, do you see, a movement towards a deal or something similar to a solution for the war? Because we are heading slowly towards the US elections of 2024. Thanks.
You want to address that question to whom exactly, Tommaso?
Peut-être deux choses, et ça fera le lien aussi.
Perhaps two things, and I think this will link up with the previous question as well. First of all, the European Union supports a just peace formula because it is anchored in the Charter of the United Nations and the sovereignty of the territory of Ukraine, and also it is anchored in justice, that we need accountability for such severe acts that are committed. And that's an international matter. So that's the position on Ukraine, and I can't speak on behalf of anyone other than the European Union, so that's the first thing. We have very tight coordination on that position. Within G7 as well, we have very tight coordination on this topic. And then secondly, linking up with the previous question, I think this is essential, and I think your question allows me to be very clear about this. We want to reassert the unity and the determination of the European Union vis-à-vis of the situation in Ukraine, and that will not falter. And it's also important to point out, to take note of the fact that our friends in Latin America and the Caribbean are upholding international law alongside us, and they've said that Ukraine is an important security issue for Europe and the world. It's a global matter, which is of extreme importance, and that is brought to the fore. So what I'm trying to say is that we've already given you our message as the European Union, and we have partners across the globe, including in Latin America and the Caribbean, and let's not forget, we are not blind to the fact that there are many other challenges that have not disappeared since the war broke out. Climate change, fair international finance, in order to overcome development challenges and poverty, or the radical digital transformations that have taken place with the emergence of artificial intelligence. On all of these topics and all of these challenges which already existed before this war of aggression against Ukraine, and of course that's a particular difficulty, the European Union remains committed to those topics as well as part of the partnerships that we have. And I think it's very important that we bring those messages to the fore as well. And we want our friends in Ukraine to work alongside us to bring that message to the other regions of the world as well.
All of us, we want peace, and most of all, the people in Ukraine want peace. They suffer horribly. And I think it was a very good session that we had today on Russia's war in Ukraine, because you could feel there's one core element that keeps us together and where the common ground is. And this is indeed the UN Charter and the international law. And it was born from the ashes of World War II. So it was born out of a terrible experience of war and put together in a system of rules we all subscribed. And we all hold dear. We all hold dear because, and this was very strong in the room too, we never know if not tomorrow one of us needs to call on the UN Charter to be protected. And therefore I think it was a very fruitful and good discussion that we had, clarifying that we want a just and lasting peace and that we have the common ground with the UN Charter and with the international law.
Thank you, Madam President.
At the same time, let me just add this so that there's absolute clarity. Look, we are not all children in here. And in fact, I don't see any child here. Historically, we have had a lot of big power activities against smaller, poorer countries, less powerful countries. And we see it happening in Latin America. And some who would do things in Latin America and the Caribbean, and who would raise, when you raise certain principles of non-interference in the internal affairs, the use of force, and all the rest of it, they will ignore you. Yet some of those same countries are the ones who are raising those very principles in Ukraine. So that we have to get rid of the hypocrisy if we have to get a better world. And let us apply these principles in the Charter of the United Nations in a clear and objective manner and call a spade whenever the circumstances arise.
¿Puedo agregar algo? Soy el único que no hablo de Ucrania, así que voy a aprovechar para decir algo.
Let me just take this opportunity to add something. The first thing is, I'd like it to be clear that this was a summit between the EU and CELAC, with political, economic, cultural ties between Europe, Latin American and the Caribbean countries. Now, this meeting took place at the same time as we have this war between Russia and Ukraine. And I have to say that the vast majority of the EU and CELAC countries condemn in the United Nations the Russian invasion. And what I'm trying to say with this is that there's a lot of media speculation about this summit, saying that it was all revolving around the war in Ukraine. But no, that's happening. Of course, there were different voices that were expressed around the table. Of course there were. But it wasn't the main item on our agenda. We obviously have to make progress on all of these other points. So let me make it crystal clear here. It wasn't that Latin America was reluctant to speak out against the war in Ukraine. We have done in the United Nations. We have done that. So please, put a stop to this media speculation.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President.
Conference, we've just published the statement on behalf of EU and CELAC. Thank you.